concept of strength in JuJutsu Kaisen and what it takes to become the strongest sorcerer is a really fascinating one and is explored in various ways throughout the series. Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer of the modern day, almost perfectly embodies the philosophy of the strongest set up by the series, and he even refers to himself as the Honored One. However, while Gojo certainly possesses many traits of the strongest, I believe Gojo's awakening was something of a false enlightenment, leading him and others to believe he'd already reached the pinnacle of sorcery when, in fact, he was still held back by flaws in his mindset, and he still had room to grow. This is most clearly exposed by contrasting him with Sukuna, who proves his superiority over Gojo by triumphing over him in their battle in Shinjuku. What I want to talk about today, therefore, is what were the flaws in Gojo's thinking that held him back, what it means to be the strongest, and why Gojo realistically could never perfectly embody this mindset in the same way that Sukuna does. Now, before delving into this analysis, I also want to note that I actually believe that the philosophy pushed by Sukuna and represented by many of the other strong sorcerers in the series will likely be shown to be flawed by the end of the series. I think it will be revealed that there are other paths to strength that haven't been considered by the current crop of strong sorcerers. The reason that Sukuna has gone undefeated for so long is that the strong sorcerers who challenged him all subscribe to the same mindset as Sukuna, but they can never adopt this better than he has, and therefore were always doomed to lose to him. But that's a topic for another day, so for now we'll just be discussing this based on the philosophy the show has presented to us thus far. So, let's get into the analysis. Firstly, what is strength in JuJutsu Kaisen? Strength in JuJutsu Kaisen comes from not simply your physical power and curse technique, but primarily an overwhelming sense of self, from knowing and being secure in your own identity. A strong sorcerer must possess a deep-rooted and unshakable self-confidence in themselves and their desires, allowing them to impose their will upon their external reality, changing it in their image without allowing that external reality to influence them back. This is evident from the signature move of the series, Domain Expansion, wherein a sorcerer literally creates a space separate from the world in their own self-image. It is the externalization and manifestation of their internal self, their ideals, and their technique. It is considered the peak of sorcery, and Sukuna wields the ultimate form of this, where he is able to manifest his domain within the physical world with no barrier or separation, literally overwriting the physical reality he perceives. This self-belief and strong sense of self translates into a relentless pursuit of the individual desires of a sorcerer. Sukuna states that a sorcerer should not need external validation, that they should be unbounded by other people's expectations and ideals, and that they should only act based on their own beliefs and desires. He even says that his power was so great that he wasn't bound by ideals. It's clear he views this as an escape from the stifling nature of society's expectations and ideals, which he believes would in turn stunt one's growth. A sorcerer must be liberated from all their burdens and constraints in order to become truly free and truly strong. Now, coming on to Gojo, Gojo definitely embodies many of these traits. He has an overwhelming sense of self and confidence in his abilities. This is shown time and time again throughout the series, where not only are people and curses afraid of Gojo and flee from his very presence, but he also continuously bets on himself when the odds are stacked against him, and he pulls off impossible feats, or feats that were thought to be impossible, essentially removing himself from what would otherwise be a checkmate for a lesser sorcerer, or for someone with a weaker mindset. Two key examples of this are in the Shibuya arc, when he's fighting the disaster curses, and then again in Shinjuku when he's fighting Sukuna. So firstly, when he's fighting the disaster curses, they believe that they have Gojo cornered in an impossible situation, where he can't stop them from killing humans but also can't act without killing humans himself. However, Gojo on the spot comes up with his 0.2 second domain expansion, completely surprising the disaster curses and removing himself from a checkmate position. The curses thought they had bound him in. Then, while fighting Sukuna, Gojo loses the first domain expansion clash and has to bear the full front of Sukuna's malevolent shrine. But rather than retreating or losing faith in himself, Gojo stands firm and only comments on how his limitless is better than Sukuna's technique, an undeniable display of his overwhelming belief in himself and his abilities. Even more so, he continues to expand his domain again and again, constantly re-engaging Sukuna despite losing the first clashes. Gojo also mirrors what Sukuna says about freeing oneself from others' ideals and expectations. For example, Gojo is shown to disregard what the higher-ups think, even considering killing them all at one point. Gojo does what he pleases and is shown to be actively working towards overthrowing the current leaders of the Jujutsu world, remaking it in his image. As a quick aside, we can compare Gojo's mentality with someone like Jogo, who utterly failed at adopting the mindset of the strongest after being broken by Gojo in their first fight, leading to a stifling of his growth and then his eventual death. When we first see Jogo, he's cocky and brash. He boasts about how curses are the true humans and how he wants to burn the fake humans away. Knowing that Gojo is the strongest sorcerer of the modern age, he still actively seeks him out and challenges him to a fight. He uses his abilities to their fullest extent and even opens his domain expansion. By the time he fights Sukuna, his brash attitude has been completely stripped away by his defeat at the hands of Gojo, leaving a much more subdued and passionless Jogo. He seems to have lost his strong desire from the early series, disregarding his own life and desires, and preferring instead to entrust everything to Sukuna. When Sukuna challenges him to a fight, Jogo refrains from using his domain expansion, stating he already knows he'd lose in a clash with Sukuna. This is the complete opposite of Gojo, who never backed down and never lost faith in his abilities. And Sukuna himself comments on this, telling Jogo that he didn't have the hunger to seize his desires and burn everything around him to an ash in order to achieve them. Now, despite what we've talked about, and despite his immense, overwhelming power and possessing many of the qualities that define a strong sorcerer, Gojo also has certain key flaws and weaknesses that prevented him from achieving true enlightenment. As I discussed earlier, one of the key tenets of a strong sorcerer is having a strong identity and being secure in yourself. Sukuna embodies this very well, being described as a natural calamity and exemplified by his quote, "I eat when I want to eat. If someone is annoying, I kill him. If they are interesting, I play with them. I just live within my own means." Gojo is unable to live freely in the moment like Sukuna does, without regrets or hang-ups. His flaws are all rooted in his identity as the strongest. For Gojo, this is his identity, his blessing, his curse, and the source of his deep isolation. To truly understand Gojo's isolation and identity crisis, we have to take it back to the Hidden Inventory arc, where we see Gojo in his youth. And we see that Gojo in the past did not have the same struggle as his adult self, and this is in large part due to the fact that he shared the title of the strongest with his friend Geto. We see Gojo himself reinforce this by telling people we are the strongest. But after Gojo's awakening in the fight against Toji, the dynamic shifts. Gojo ascends to a new plane of power and strength, leaving Geto behind. The "we are the strongest" changes to "I am the strongest," eventually culminating in the iconic quote from Geto, "Are you the strongest because you're Gojo Satoru? Or are you Gojo Satoru because you're the strongest?" This is almost the curse that Geto left with Gojo. Gojo struggled to form a deep connection with anyone else after Geto, feeling as though they did not understand him due to his role as the strongest sorcerer. This comes back to what Sukuna said about sorcerers needing to live freely and unconstrained. Gojo felt burdened by his role as the strongest and was unable to escape it. This is again emphasized throughout the story. There's a chapter where the characters are all interviewed about Gojo, and when describing him they all arrive at the singular description of the strongest. We also see other characters like Nanami beginning to rely solely on Gojo, wondering why they can't just leave everything to him. And not only is there this perception of Gojo from others, we see how Gojo himself views others in his death scene. He talks about how, even though he was adored, he views others as blooming flowers, saying that you can't ask a flower to understand you. His choice of words here is interesting. By using the word flowers, we see that Gojo views others as something fragile and small, something that needs protection. By blooming, we can infer he's referring mainly to his students, who he's nurtured and helped grow. This is quite a paternalistic attitude, and although well-intentioned, clearly is Gojo putting himself on another level compared to his students and his comrades. In the same way, a parent cannot expect their child to truly understand or be on the same level as them. His point about them not being able to understand him reminds me of a character from another series who, interestingly enough, is also shown to be lonely due to their overwhelming power, although I believe more superficially. And that's Aizen from Bleach, who tells Hitsugaya that admiration is the furthest emotion from understanding. In both cases, the characters reject the admiration heaped upon them, lamenting instead that it made it impossible for them to be truly understood and connected with. Gojo's deepest desire was for an equal who could understand him for who and what he truly is. He had this in Geto, but he lost it, and he still wishes for a reality where Geto never abandoned him. This longing underpins Gojo's decision to become a teacher. On the surface, it was to change the JuJutsu world, but I believe on a subconscious level, it was to break him out of his bubble of isolation by raising others to his level. And it's this complex which ultimately held Gojo back from achieving true enlightenment. His inability to look past his own strength, his loneliness loneliness and isolation and his identity crisis. This has also led to his desires being twisted against him, such as when Kenjaku successfully sealed him into the prison realm by taking advantage of his weaknesses around Geto. When we contrast this with Sukuna, we see the clear difference. Sukuna is not burdened by the idea of his strength. To him, that is simply the way of the world, and he doesn't seek external validation for it. He truly is the embodiment of a calamity. He doesn't ask himself why, he simply acts. Sukuna has transcended humanity in a way that somebody like Gojo never can, because Gojo is still limited by his human condition. When speaking with Kashimo, Sukuna even calls Gojo greedy, because to Sukuna, human connections and bonds are what limit a sorcerer and weaken them. We see this in the words that Sukuna speaks to Jogo, telling him that humans flocking together, curses flocking together. Comparing themselves to those around them leads to weakness and stunts their growth. Sukuna believes it's impossible for a sorcerer to both be strong and have meaningful bonds with others. That's why he calls Gojo greedy, as he sees him as wanting it both ways. And this is why I believe it would be impossible for Gojo or anyone else to surpass Sukuna in this regard. Sukuna was only able to achieve the apex of this mindset through hedonism and selfishness, and an utter inhuman disregard for all else. Gojo very briefly held a similar mindset. When he first ascended during his fight with Toji, we see how euphoric he is, and how he doesn't care for anything else at that point in time. He hates no one, he feels no anger over Rika's death. He feels at peace with and at one with the world. However, his humanity and latent attachment to his bonds and others means he cannot maintain the state indefinitely. And Gojo himself finally seems to come to terms with this during his airport vision, at least partially, after his death. He tells Geto that his one regret after fighting Sukuna was that Geto wasn't there to pat him on the back. This moment of clarity underscores the theme of false enlightenment, as Gojo realizes that his path, while noble, was inherently limited by his human vulnerabilities. He also appears as a teenager rather than his adult self, showing the longing he has for the past where he wasn't burdened with the identity of the strongest. So, in conclusion, Gojo Satoru's journey in JuJutsu Kaisen illustrates the limitations and flaws inherent in the pursuit of becoming the strongest. His false enlightenment, rooted in his overwhelming power and sense of isolation, ultimately held him back from achieving true transcendence. In contrast, Sukuna's inhuman disregard for anything beyond his desires enabled him to embody the pinnacle of strength in the series. Gojo's struggle and ultimate realization highlight the complex interplay between power, identity, and human connection, offering a nuanced perspective on what it truly means to be the strongest. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I actually believe that a different philosophy on what it takes to become the strongest will eventually rise up and be shown to rival that which Sukuna and other characters such as Gojo and Kashimo believe in. I believe that Yuji and some of the other students of Gojo will be the first ones to lead the way in this regard. But that is a topic for another video. So if you have listened to the whole video, thank you very much for listening. As always, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on what I've discussed, whether you agree or disagree. And if you'd like to see any more videos on any other topics or characters, please just let me know. Thank you.